Thank you very much for your presentation. Both were very interesting, and I will try to see how we can combine it. Because I'm not so sure you've talked about the same urban fabric. And in the first part of your presentation, Jorak, you gave us a very interesting and dynamic presentation. I think we could easily apply the criticism you made of the urban project developed under the Bloomberg administration to an analysis of risk here in the canal area of Brussels. But the bigness of New York City, which is not the same. But I will ask a question related to design. And I think that maybe we can have a discussion between not only social scientists and urban designer, but with the scale of the type of design you are promoting and you are talking in your book, which is very interesting. And it seems that this kind of experiences are local experience. How can we come, and they are very useful for us at the beginning of such an experience at the Metrolab. But how to combine this local experience with metropolitan scale? Who are the partners in these workshops and this experience, and who are not participating, and who are deciding in the dark side of the workshop? And maybe it will be the other question to Monsieur Le Gallès, to see if this kind of participation is think in the urban fabric, such as you were told in your presentation. Okay.
No. I start. Okay. So I would see this as analogous to what Patrick talked about, because I think research matters. And the way in which these designers engaged are really acts of research. They are, occasionally they go this way or that way, they go beyond or not, but these are the sites for the production of new knowledge. And that's exactly what the aim of any research should be. So in that sense, I see them as analogous. In terms of scale, I do believe that, I don't want to make a blanket statement whether planning is alive or planning is dead or I don't know what, but I do believe that in many of our, I don't want to say our, but many of the cities around the world today, planning as we used to know it and planning as it was practiced is no longer, maybe it's not that it's no longer possible, it's no longer that relevant. It is still possible, as we know, corporations have more power today than many states, and they can plan, they can afford to plan. Many states cannot afford to plan. That's the problem. They're in crisis mode. So I believe that the only planning possible today is planning through a real situated, sometimes community, sometimes citizen engagement. And those are smaller projects with provisional closures, with an eye on long-term benefit. Ezio Manzini, for example, in his book, Design When Everybody Designs, literally says that the only planning possible today is, planning through projects, and therefore these projects, in fact, what you need to do is design an infrastructure, he calls them infrastructural projects, that have many components that are basically linked, synergized together with their overarching thinking that he no longer calls a plan but a project, for a number of reasons, now not to bother the audience. But what is really interesting is that when you work with people, and Patrick talked about long-term partnerships, and we do the same, but we do the same with city with the design for transport public space, we do with the Department of Transportation and so on and so forth. But very often actually, even when you work with communal organizations, community-based organizations or civic associations, what you have is that when you say to people it's going to take 10 years to do this, they say, oh God, I don't even know if I will be here in 10 years. And the reason why is because they're completely disenfranchised. I mean, they have no security, no land tenure, nothing, right? So they don't know where they're going to be in 10 years. If you say, however, let's do this, whatever that was, let's do this, and we're going to do it in 15 weeks, which is basically the length of a semester, academic semester. We're going to do this in 15 weeks, and there will be results at the end of this project. People are much more enthusiastic about engaging in this thing. And then you continue the next semester and the next semester. And so 15 weeks then becomes, provisional closure for your long-term work, which is how you build it and how, in fact, they also then begin to understand that a longer-term investment is needed. At that point, my argument has been with our students always, at that point, it's not that this is now over, super optimistic about the role of design, but you provide a way of thinking, you nurture a way of thinking that will make them think about staying and finding ways of incorporating, creating cooperatives, creating what in order to stay in the place. And that leads to a political engagement. That's the bottom line.
Yep. Well, I could not agree more. I think the two presentations are very complementary in many ways, and that's precisely because we take design very seriously that we do develop social science, because we know we don't do the same thing. In a way, for me, that's a little bit what was difficult in Institut Urbanisme, was trying to bring all these things together, and it didn't work very well. It's a wonderful project, and it proves very difficult. And in a way, we're just taking different roads, making it more complementary. On the scale issue, I don't think so, because in many ways, as you know very well, number one, in many cities, the way you see organized interest and the way some protest is organized is first at a neighborhood level. And part of the political dynamics is structured by project and by small-scale neighborhood, or sometimes big project, but very precise thing. And that's why one of the themes about urban governance is governing by project, and trying to make the link between the project for the city and then the governance by precise project. That's one of the key tension in the governance of many cities. And what has been said is very, very important, is that a number of dynamics over time are either aggregation of what happens in different parts of the city, or by contrast, some attempt to mobilize existing groups at different stages. So all urban scholars, we all know that we have to articulate various scale of phenomenon. And as you know very well, even if you study social segregation, you may have different types of process at the neighborhood scale. And then at the scale of the city, you get something different. And at the scale of a metropolitan area, a completely different type of segregation. So we are obliged all the time to play with a different scale. I think we all do that.
Yeah, maybe just to reframe a bit what has been said already by before. Indeed, the lectures were very inspiring and are very convergent. I think both are kind of saying that designer and urban government should be intricated in this network of stakeholders from the state, from the civil society, and from the private sector. And we saw many interesting experiences, but maybe trying to look a bit how society has evolved, and maybe I will play the role of the most pessimist guy tonight, but let's say urban action is happening since the 70s, and we know that, and you have shown there are many people really willing to go into this kind of action. But if we look, for example, at the number of schools of design in the United States that are not really connected to this architecture school, for example, or even school of planning of urbanism that are still just practicing design, do you think there is really at the moment a kind of evolution that would kind of bring this to the front, or that would change the way that, let's say, this interconnection between stakeholders is going beyond simple top-down or bottom-up? Or I would just like to hear you about this. Yeah, I do think so very much, and at least for two reasons. The
The first reason is that the population of the city, as we saw wonderfully in the case of New York, but to a lesser extent Brussels would also fit, we have more and more diverse population. So a lot of our political system and the way we govern and we give direction to city was based on the assumption that with representative democracy, elite had some legitimacy with election to give a direction and to really take control of some of the program. This doesn't work very well anymore. And if you study politics precisely, you know that both the diversity of population and second, the type of population makes it extraordinarily difficult to work in politics in classic vertical way. It doesn't mean it should be eliminated. It just means that it's much, much more difficult. When I teach public policy, when I don't teach urban stuff, and one of the things we told students is that most public policy don't work very well. Lots of them fail. So there's a very big sense. The second thing for urban in particular is that, the consequence of this first point is that we see forms of mobilization and forms of politics which are becoming specifically urban, which the way coalitions are being made, conflicts are solved, representations being created are just going far beyond classic exercise of government or planning. The second one, I think, is technology related to the rest. But look at the way those people like my neighbor are starting to use 3D and all sort of technology. That's a fantastic tools to think about, to protest, to change the way you elaborate project, the way you can discuss with concrete examples and making visual for a number of people. And even today, you know that, of course, you know very well, just the way social networks and a lot of production of ideas are done through social networks and are not connected exactly to the official debate, just makes what is going on in cities, I think, will change a lot in terms of the way we think collective action. I think it's going to be a very, very interesting moment. And that will be quite tough for classic planners and designers and architects, but very tough for classic social science as well.
I think again, a couple of ways to answer this question. I agree, and I think from the design point of view, it's you're almost looking at the same thing. And in a way, when you think about what is, if we talk about research in both cases, when you just think about, what is the unit of analysis in this research, you get to the point where you begin to, if you frame it as, you had the term metropolitan. I realized in your presentation, even though I didn't understand everything, but I saw the term, there is territories, cities, metropolitan, urban, so it's all terms are together. And what is really interesting when you begin to think about it is that each of those terms actually has a totally different connotations. And if you take them as units of analysis, then you will get a completely different results. So the question may be even, if you take kind of the apparatus of design, what is the most adequate unit of analysis, or should all of them be reframed and something else needs to be framed as the unit or whatever it is, the entity that can be the object of analysis of design through research, right? For sociology, it may be different. It may not be different. I don't know. I think that's something you will need to negotiate as a group, right? That's always a matter. And I think it's institution dependent. So what is in one institution possible and desirable, in another institution may not be. And I think that's actually fine. I think that's all right. That's exactly how it should be. That's how we can do complementary work. On the other hand, talking about the scale and the communities and all of that, what is interesting to me, or has been in all these projects so far, is the fact that I said 40% of people, they're not born there, but it's land. And it's really land tenure and zoning policy and who owns the land. I mean, at the end of the day, zoning and who owns the land really determines the dynamics of urban politics and economy. And so, in a way, if you have a great majority of people living, in fact, in a disenfranchised way, meaning they have They don't own anything, they don't own apartments, they don't own houses, they don't own land, they don't own anything. They are in fact really exposed to the forces that they not only don't understand, but that are simply, as I said during the presentation, are pushing them further and further away. And so when you engage with them at this level through the processes, some of the processes I described, one of the first question is, students propose, for example, a cooperative, a social cooperative. And one of the projects that I had on the slides is basically a social cooperative in Holland. And that's fine, except that for social cooperative to succeed, you need a lot of time, you need 10, 20, 30 years. You need a lot of people to stay put and to work together. You need a lot of trust, and you need an attachment to a place. And so when you think about that and you look at the New York City, you say, wait a minute, you just designed a cooperative organization, but how are you going to manage to change the culture of the place? Because as Tom Gotti has argued over and over again, if you think about New York City particularly, the mobility, physical and social mobility, particularly physical mobility, is seen as a sign of success in the United States, right? If you move, you're moving because there is an opportunity. No one is obliged to move, except for a few people who are, of course, obviously displaced through. But most people move because there is opportunity. If you say to people now, in New York City or elsewhere, that they need to be put for 30 years in a place in order to build a cooperative, you are basically really going against the mainstream culture of the place. It's a completely different mentality. It's a totally different relation to each other, to place, to land, to country, to the city, to everything. Because meaning that if you're put and committed to a group of people who are your neighbors, you will be better off than if there is another job in San Diego you need to go and get for double the salary you're getting in Bronx. And so, fighting this is a huge thing. Which for that you need to create all kinds of design, if you will, all kinds of opportunities, create policies and so on and so forth, so that they actually can be enabled to stay. And I think that's the bottom line. Land is just, oh, sorry.
I agree.
Okay.
Anybody for a question? If not, maybe I have one question, maybe not last question, but I have one question though, to Patrick Le Gallet. What did you mean by research for research, and how is it a possible purpose for people studying city life to develop research for research, as we would do art for art? Is it an aesthetic relationship to knowledge, or how can knowledge work for itself, and can we really stress this dimension of research nowadays with the stakes of our large cities?
It's a normative statement, of course, and it's a reaction against the increasing pressure about the impact of your research, or how useful is your research, or how legitimate politically is your research. And I think it's an extremely naive, rational view of what research is about. I think the experience we have in a number of cases is that very often you produce research for no instrumental reasons whatsoever. And then some people will use it. Some people will use it in a creative way. Some people will, maybe 10 years later, do bits and pieces and do some interesting with that. So it's just to say we should not legitimate research in an instrumental way, and we should resist. You may know that now the evaluation of academics in the UK and social science in particular depends on their impact. Okay, so if you talk to a minister, you get points. I think this is utterly rubbish, and this should be, combated very strongly. So my point is, just developing research for research is legitimate in itself, because by producing new knowledge, then some other people, maybe not yourself, but lots of people will use that in a way. But of course, you should not only do that. And I think there are also other ways to produce research, including the sort of things you do, and in more pragmatic way. There are lots of other ways to produce knowledge and research. I'm just saying we should not accept to always try to legitimize research by some instrumental reasons and for some sort of impact. Because the experience shows that there are lots of different ways through which it might play a role in some ways, through other kinds of people. Some people specialize in mediating, some people are influenced for all sorts of reasons, and it may be and if you don't do that, then if you only narrow to instrumental research, then it's a big mistake. What I'm not saying is you should only do research for research. And there are lots of other ways, including by being more pragmatic on existing. There are lots of ways to produce knowledge that are more related to action. But it's just the resistance against, okay, you get funding if you can demonstrate that your research is useful. And I think there are a lot of pressure in social science, in particular, to go along this way. And we should always say no. Historically, we know that producing different kinds of knowledge and research is enough as a legitimation. I'm not saying we should only do that, but that should be kept. The research-oriented should really guide a lot of things we do, including influencing the teaching, influencing all sorts of practices later on. That's why I say that.
It's in a way fighting against the commodification of research, isn't it?
Not just commodification, managerialism, instrumentalization of research, not just commodification. I think it's a more worrying trend in some ways.
But just a word,
and
if I can replay. Stressing the pragmatic dimension of research doesn't restrict it to its instrumental ends. You can also stress the pragmatic communicative necessities of research. Research as a form of communication, and I was just worried about a certain form of urban research that would derive to or drift to a sort of an aesthetic of the city, or where people find some kind of aesthetic or even poetic experience with doing research or exploring the city and things like that. And I think that it is also a certain trend in urban sociology and in urban research to disconnect research from its pragmatic forms and maybe from its instrumental capacity sometimes. Yeah.
It's a large church. We can do lots of things.
Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you so much to our two guests, especially maybe to Metrolab, who had a very long trip for coming here for a short presentation, but there are many more things to say about these projects, and I'm sure we will hear you soon. Merci beaucoup à vous. Thank you everybody for coming, and now we're just gonna play some music and have some drinks and food maybe. Just stay around. Thank you.